I don't know whether you were, Kevin, but you understand what we're trying to do here? Does every shall I just explain where we're coming at from this? Um, this is in the it's in the PFI sort of working group. It's under that, not because it's particular to PFI. It's just that PFI it has got a particular interest in this, and that's where it was triggered. One of the special purpose vehicles, SPVs, Albany, told me probably a month or so ago that they were conducting retrospective fire strategies on some of their projects. And I was intrigued as to why they were investing that money, because with the greatest respect, Anne, people, Anne is from Reslis, so she's an SPV. The SPVs don't tend to spend the money that they don't need to. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but
I think that's a fair comment.
yeah. So I was intrigued as to why they were doing it. And that came at the same sort of time that in the BIM for Housing design group meeting, working group meeting, we were discussing how building regs, how the building regs PD role is operating. And what came from that, what emerged from that, was the importance of having an up-to-date fire strategy. And what the PDs were saying was that often that's a big problem, because the fire strategy that they are working with is either insufficiently complete, or it was done 2 stages before the period that they were at.
Can I grab some money upstairs for dinner?
Yeah. So I think from that point of view, it's quite interesting that sorry, my daughter just came in and asked me a question. So the whole process of getting that information up to date is relevant in terms of both design, but more importantly, the retrospective aspect of things is doing it for existing buildings. And when I probed it a little bit more, I came to realize that actually, if you do a fire risk assessment and you don't have an up-to-date fire strategy, there's all sorts of question marks as to the validity of that. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah, definitely. From my point of view, we've got an element with Wolverhampton Homes at the moment where we're looking at a number of properties where, from a fire strategy point of view, the building was done in the 60s and so on. So trying to understand what was the original fire strategy to what we've got now, and there's, I wouldn't say disagreement, but there's a line with our fire engineer and is at a point that thinks it's this, and their client might think it's slightly different, so they want to do this type of scope, which then there's a bit of crossover around that. So from a PD point of view, puts you in a very difficult position to understand, actually, should we be doing that or should we be doing that? And now the risk is a lot worse, because now we've got more, electrical equipment and so on in those areas, which you wouldn't originally had. So then trying to get some clarity around that. If you had a recognised fire strategy there, done, dusted, then those conversations with the client, the tenants, all that kind of stuff, and knowing what you can do and more confidence of that evidence is a lot easier than it is actually, this is what we think, and then this is what the fire engineers come in and current regs, this is what this should look like. This is how we assume it to be. So without that information that gives you that and evidence, it's very difficult to have, so we're trying to have conversations around that with the client, around what their scope is and their process against what the concerns the fire engineer has and something like that. So this is exactly what we're finding, and then we're doing the PD role as an organisation on it, so then that's quite difficult. to be able to demonstrate evidence. And so there's a lot of talking around that at the moment, I think.
Yes, yeah, and the other thing is that some of the work that is then spinning out of maybe a fire risk assessment, like replacing fire doors and things like that, or whatever, may actually be unnecessary in some cases because it's not reflecting back to the fire strategy. So, Carl, you've got a lot of experience in this area. Could I just ask you to contribute your thinking on it?
This touches broadly on what we discussed at the last meeting.
Yeah.
I agree entirely, of course, that the fire strategy document is an essential document. You'll recall, I'm sure, that I work primarily in social housing. And, you know, even in new build, the fire strategy document is a rare thing. I absolutely share your concern about Regulation 38 packs. In fact, I'm sitting here this morning working on a fire strategy for a very simple block of flats that's under construction. And your comment about the Reg 38 pack resonates really quite strongly, because it's not part of my remit to come up with that pack, but it's my firm belief that without that pack, the fire strategy document is less effective than it might otherwise be. As we talked about last time, it's my view, and primarily my background is as a fire risk assessor. It's my view that in a simple building, a fire risk assessor can assume a fire strategy. There should be sufficient information from inspecting the building to be able to work out what the intended fire strategy was, and as part of the fire risk assessment to ensure that the provisions made as part of the design and construction are still in place and still effective, and so on, Article 17 stuff. In a more complex building, I don't believe that's the case, or should not be the case. As others have said here this morning, there should be a fire strategy document, because the problem is, as the complexity increases, the ability to rebuild that complexity as part of a fire risk assessment becomes much more difficult. Somebody mentioned fire doors. It's a classic example. I have a client, a housing association, whose head office was, the fire doors were inspected by somebody else, and they were instructed to replace 7 or 8 doors, each of which appears to be a fire door. It has fire seals, for example, and labels identifying it as a fire door, but actually the glazed walls either side are not fire resisting. It's not a line of compartmentation, and therefore to have replaced those doors would be nonsensical and a waste of money. A fire strategy document showing the lines of compartmentation and fire resisting construction and so on, reviewed first by the fire door inspector, would have removed that risk of the client spending lots of money unnecessarily. So in summary, fire strategy document is essential. Reg 38 pack is essential. How on earth do we get everyone else in this chain to agree that that's the case and spend the money required to put that right?
Excellent, Carl. Has anybody else got any examples to contribute here? Because I think that would be helpful.
George, just not I don't know whether I can add much, but just a couple of comments there. I don't know whether people realise that before Building Regulation 38, we had exactly the same requirements in Building Regulation 16. So this goes back a long way. The other thing that I have seen on quite a lot of smaller buildings is actually on the drawings of the building, if you can find those, of course, that the fire strategy is written around the outside edge of the drawing. So it takes the approved document B and says this is this and this is this and this is this. And it's the compartmentation drawings, certainly as Carl was saying, it's the compartmentation drawings that you can't do an inspection unless you have those. And that's what life makes very difficult, because you've got people going in who don't really realise what a compartmentation is, and yet they're inspecting things that maintain compartmentation. As I think Carl said, you know, you find something with fire door written on it because somebody thinks it is, but it's got glass all the way around it, so it couldn't possibly be. But somebody at some point has labelled it up as that, or they used a piece of wood that would have been used in a fire door. Is usually the most common thing they've done. So if you do have some old drawings of buildings, you may well find that the fire strategy is written around the outside of some large AO drawings for each floor, because I have seen that, if that's of use to people.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. I think the other point with Paul, I mean, Paul's expertise is in smoke ventilation. And one of the reasons I've asked Paul to be part of this group is that what's become clear when I discussed this with Matt Wilkie, who can't be with us this morning, but Matt runs the fire strategy, the PFI initiative, the PFI group, and in that was where this kicked off, as it were, initially. And what Matt was saying was that he's got schemes where there was the fire strategy actually conflicts with the access strategy. So what actually happened on that particular one, this is a hospital where a local authority was has got as a subtenant, so they've got some spaces, and what they've done is they've put maglocks on their doors, and in this particular example, one of the doors is actually part of the fire escape. So what we've actually got there is a combination of the access strategy, which is there to keep people out, conflicting to some extent with the fire strategy, which is looking to get people out. Now, part of the problem, he told me, was that often a subtenant may not want to tell the landlord or the main responsible person what they're actually using spaces for, because people are nervous of a landlord charging them more or stopping them from doing things, or it may be that they don't realize the importance of doing that. But so therefore you get a situation, as I understand it, where the responsible person, because it's not down to an FM to provide the fire strategy, it's down to the controller of those spaces, the landlord. But if they've got subtenants who aren't providing them with the information, then there's obviously holes in the overall strategy. So at the last meeting, we've also got in this group, we've got Asa Abloy helping us as well. So we've got the means to draw these things together. Chun, you're an architect, aren't you? So what have you considered this in terms of what you're doing?
Yes, I have, but mostly we're doing retrofit residential. So so we're building the software of, trying to automate this the process. Anything can be captured, knowledge based. This we're working on in the background slowly. I'm not an expert in the fire, which is very, very, very complicated. But what we're trying to achieve, in the near future is, capture knowledge and use that as engineering template, whilst the designers doing on the design. So it prevents people making mistakes. Just exactly the same workflow in the aerospace, automotive industry. Anyway, yeah.
Good, thank you. Has anybody else got anything to contribute on this before we open it up?
Meeting last week with a particular high-end club in London, very large one, And he said his big problem now is trying to work out exactly what he's supposed to do between Martin's Law and fire evacuation. He's got a high risk club, and he said he just really is sitting there thinking, if I'm not here when something does go on, who in the organisation is going to actually make all those right critical decisions? I think Martin's Law and fire evacuation is going to cause some big issues for companies going forward in terms of what they actually have to do in complex situations like any major issue that happens right now. So it's one thing which we should look at as well. The other thing is, as you know, George, running the bill, getting these regulations correct and all the rest of one thing. It's the ongoing assessment of what's happening in these buildings. As you know, I'm not going to mention the name, but one of the biggest high-rise buildings in City of London right now hasn't had a sprinkler system working for probably 8 months. Well, most of the sprinkler system has been down for over 8 months, and yet that's okay. And I just don't get where this is going. I think we really have to start digitalizing all these assets and having real-time alerts when things go wrong to a regulator, to the fire service of that city or the regulators. I think there's too many risks being taken, and we're a fraction away from another Grenfell type situation happening. That's for sure.
Yeah.
George, I just think, I've made contact with the guys from Dubai about the BIM mandate. And principally, Paul, we're talking about digital, but it's more than that. In some ways, the BIM part is actually just a thin little layer, depending on what the requirements were for the models to deliver. And so part of this is there's actually a hands-on kind of thing. How do you stop a fire door being changed if there's maintenance taking place, etc.? And that's on the outside shell, as it were. We're not talking about inside the private tenancies. And I think that's something that we really do need to focus on and say, how do you implement a reasonably robust methodology that the mag locks don't get changed without it being recorded? And in this case, I'm going to stand on the side of technology, is that if there's a mag lock, the mag lock must come with a set of criteria that just says, beep, 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 this is the problem. And, we can automate as far as we like, but in reality, is the tenant, is the owner, is the developer going to pay for that to support it? And it's the same issue about asset management, is unless there's a real driver, it's just seen as an overhead and will be one of those like the air conditioning or the sprinkler system. Park it on one side, it won't happen until there's a calamity. And so it's trying to be predictive in a way, and in a way that's robust enough to try and identify that. And that's where the asset management CAFM system can start doing that. Because the moment that anything gets done, it gets recorded. And that must be a mandatory thing. Thank you.
Agreed. Paul? You're on mute, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, I was pressing the wrong buttons today. Just the issue with something like the sprinkler system not working, theoretically, that should now be being advised to the fire brigade, the local fire brigade, I understand, on a complex building. Now, there's two issues with that. One is you have now provided evidence that you haven't done something, and which you have to do. And the point is you're absolutely right. If it's not working for 8 months, somebody's at fault. But the problem that you've got going forward is there's complete and utter evidence that this has been the case. And if something goes wrong in that building that needed that thing to be working, it's not going to be hidden for very long. And I think that people need to be aware of that to go forward. I had a similar thing where in a relatively small building, there was a fire in the plant room. They couldn't decide whose fault it was, so they didn't decide to fix anything. The smoke control system was in there. So there was no smoke control system for well over a year, during which time there probably should have been a fire risk assessment being done by somebody, which should have highlighted that fact, etc., etc. And then finally, when they got the insurance sorted out, and it wasn't our fault, we got an order to go and fix it. But the point is that but what you've got is you've got a whole series of evidence of people not doing stuff, and you really need to be aware of that, because in the Grenfell Tower inquiry, on the last day of the smoke control, I went in to download the last report from Barbara Lane, only to discover there was an email from me and an attachment to an email that suddenly appeared in evidence, which I'd sent in 2009 for a company I hadn't worked for 10 years. So nothing is hidden. Okay, that's what I'm saying to you. Luckily, in that email, I said pretty much what I would say today, so I wasn't worried about it. But what people have got to realise is that if you don't do anything about something, there is huge amounts of evidence that you haven't.
I think that's really helpful, Paul. And I think the example's very telling there as well. Chris.
Yeah, thanks, George. It's just fascinating conversation. It's an observation, really. The majority of my time is spent with or trying to help people who manage facilities, and the observation being is that the level of skills and expertise that we've talked about already on the however long we've been on the call is not something that I recognise immediately in terms of the people that I work with. They're superb people, wonderful people, don't have this expertise, do need to be aware where to look for and how to reach out for that expertise. And Pierre, you mentioned a minute or two ago about the CAFM system. Completely agree. But a lot of the work we do, and I do in my team, is trying to help people use those CAFM systems to, well, I was going to say to the optimum, sort of in an optimum manner, which is true, I suppose. But actually, sometimes it's just get the basics right. And I think there is what I'm trying to say, I suppose, in terms of the comment, is there is just a significant gap between the level of expertise on this call and the conversations that we're having and the information that is actually already out there, and the ability of a cohort of people who are responsible for managing these buildings to actually implement that information. And I fully agree that, and I know, George, you're saying, well, that's what we're here for. I totally get that. But it's still very prevalent, and it's really concerning. And sometimes when you talk with people who are doing these sorts of roles and these sorts of jobs across all different sectors, you think, well, where do you start with this? And of course, you start with compliance. You start with what keeps us out of jail. And some people are really good at that. The people that are really good at that, I think, are still not having the conversations that we're having here. So I guess it's just an observation that gap is quite significant, I think. Thank you.
So hold that thought, Chris, about compliance, because that's certainly something that we discussed last week at the London Build on the panels, on a couple of the panels. And I want to come back on to that in a few minutes, because I think that's one of our big challenges. But the other thing I would say, and I'll then hand over to Kevin, the other point is, I think, a misunderstanding about what normally goes into a CAFM system. Now, part of the challenge there is that CAFM is computer-aided facilities management, which is quite wide. Most CAFM systems are actually implemented, and Chris, you're more knowledgeable about this than me, but most of them are there to produce work instructions for planned maintenance work.
Yes.
And that planned maintenance work is either statutory items that need maintaining or operationally critical items. So
Yes.
a lot of the things that we're looking at in terms of fire strategy are passive.
Yes.
And therefore they wouldn't be put into a CAFM system.
So it's a massive problem. We've got that on 2 projects, exactly that right now. It's where you have the assessments done by an independent. They say, where are the systems? Where are the assets on the CAFM system? They're not even on there.
Exactly.
So yeah, absolutely.
Now, that doesn't mean that they couldn't be put into a CAFM system, but there are commercial very strong commercial reasons why people limit how much information is put into, how many assets are put into a CAFM system, because unless you can demonstrate that you've been doing the maintenance on, let's say, cavity barriers or walls or penetration seals or something like that, then that comes up as a penalty, or could do. And therefore, so I think understanding what a CAFM system, or what we mean by a CAFM system, is quite important. Kevin, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, it's quite interesting what people are saying. I was just going to go back on Paul's point, and while we were talking around, so I'm very, very closely with Grenfell and what happened with Grenfell, and some things connecting forward on it. I just wanted to make a point about the compliance piece, not compliance piece, but the account person should have a system for MOR. And what needs to be really thought about also, I think, which is a bit more tricky, is that there needs to be that sort of resident engagement, which was a big thing that was failing on Grenfell. And I think it's understanding, one, that there's an MOR and people need to know who are going to be in those buildings day in, day out, that this is safe and this is elements. If they spot anything, they know what they're looking at, but it's very difficult from a non-technical manner. So, there's a couple of things that the BSA, came out of that really need to be considered around how do you get that tenant engagement? How do you make sure there's enough information for them to be able, in a format, for them to understand? So if there is something like, and anything in terms of sprinklers, for example, that should have been a thing raised up straight away on an MOR if it was a high-risk building. So if it's a high-risk building, there's a responsibility for that ongoing to maintain that. So for me, that would be something that raised MOR, and then they'd have to do it straight away. That they'd have to do that work. So I don't see why that should really delay those things, but from that point of view. But I think there's a real element to how do you engage with tenants, and how does that work? I think, so, from my point of view.
What you've actually brought things back to, Kevin, is something that I do want to cover here, and that's how people are using spaces. Because I think the resident side of things, I've got a couple of observations that were made to me last week on resident engagement, and also that has a big impact on the fire strategy, because if people are using spaces differently than they were originally designed to be used, and therefore the strategy needs to change, it needs to be updated. And what's the mechanisms that we've got to actually do that? So, but coming back on the resident engagement one, it was interesting. I was with Neville from who used to be the head of fire safety at Southampton Council. So I was with him on the other night, and he was talking about Dame Judith and the conversations that he's had with her, and he ended up being rather unpopular at one of the meetings because she was repeating her oft narrative about landlords need to engage properly with the residents, and we were talking about this in relation to AWAB's law, which is what we're talking about on Thursday, by the way. This is the whole damp and mold side of things, and also fire and water safety as well. I understand. But what he was saying was that when they try and engage with residents, they really, really struggle to get them interested. he said the amount of effort that they as the council were doing to actually make people aware of the systems and technologies and things that they were putting in for fire safety was very, very challenging. Yeah. If people, what he was saying was that the trouble is in a council, it's also political. So you've got a councillor. What that councillor does, he or she announces that they're going to lobby for new kitchens or new bathrooms. So what interests you more, fire safety or a new kitchen? Yeah. And understandably, people go for the new kitchen. And he was saying that that's a constant problem that they've got in terms of getting engagement. And it's also the case that certainly in terms of the damp and mold side of things, from what I understand, clearly there are problems with the buildings. Clearly there are problems with maintenance. But a major part of the risk is actually coming down to how residents are using their spaces. And that's not something that the council, even though now by law they are responsible for, and that they're responsible for sorting out the impact of things, but there's a real danger of it just becoming something that is the next PPI claims for lawyers to go around and wrap up people, because you've got to respond within 24 hours, which is probably draconian, I would say. So I think we as our community, there's nothing we can do about that side of things, but what we can do is understand what the problem is and how can we try and fix it. And part of the activity I think that I'd like this group to be looking at is how can we look at fire strategies and deal with the fact that there aren't that many fire engineers around, and those that are reluctant to get involved in too much complexity, because quite frankly, a lot of the things that they need to be able to make a fire risk, do a fire strategy, things like having compartmentation drawings and things like that, that work could be done more effectively through our community. And therefore, when the fire engineer is carrying out the work, he may be able to do that within 2 days rather than 2 weeks. So it means it becomes more affordable. We need to automate some of these things. Paul.
I was just going back when Kevin was discussing. One of the issues, Kevin, was that from what I can see, there's at least 4, if not 5, cooks in the kitchen here. You got the building agent, you got the operating agent, you have at least 2 or 3 independent people coming in on the sprinkler system. I was trying to get to the point of who actually signed off this piece of documentation 3 weeks before we arrived, which said it was all working correctly. And 6 months later, when we came back, nobody had done anything about it. I think the problem is there's too many cooks spoil the broth here in this particular scenario with that particular building, saying that this building where I am right now, as I've said before, I was here at 10:30 one night with a power cut. Not one fire evacuation sign was working because nobody changed the batteries for 12 years. None of the fire doors were open because it had changed from a manual system to a mobile phone system. And nobody knew I was on the third. Nobody knew it was me and 4 people on the 39th floor of the building. Wow. And they don't know I'm here today, and they won't know I'm here tomorrow. And the same goes for, I'll call it out, 22 Bishopsgate, 64 floors, 13,000 people, and nobody has a clue that anybody is in that building because convenience means the doors open automatically when you leave, so you tap in, but you don't tap out. And to me, that was the most basic, stupid mistake we're all making in these high-rise buildings. But hey, I just feel like I'm repeating myself. What I would say, sorry, my apologies, is I think we got to look at, is there a way of digitalizing this whole golden thread from design stage? I mean, remember, I was with George at a conference, and Dame Judah Hackett was speaking. She was saying 69% of high-rise building plans that get to her in stage 1 are rejected because I haven't got the basic fire solutions in place. That's a gateway 1. Now I don't know how the hell architects in 2025, years after Grenfell, are still submitting designs that 69% will get rejected at that point. So there's a lot of finger point has to be done at this industry itself. But I do think we should all, from design right through to implementation to hand over the whole lot, we need to digitalize the whole thing. So you are like a DocuSign handing over that you have done this point to this point. There's too much from what I can see. I might be wrong. There's too much paperwork here. And I've certainly been in meetings with somebody else in this meeting where we were shocked when someone said, yeah, we just box tick if you haven't had time to do it. Which maybe I'm just getting lucky and hanging around some really dodgy people who don't give a damn. But it is something which I just think we have to move forward and work out, from start to finish, how we digitalize this. And you just, it's, where you fall into fault, you just ask how much time am I doing behind bars. And crack on with it.
I think that's right. And one of the big challenges I think that we've got an opportunity to deal with, and that is, as an impartial group, we should be able to produce some means to influence the people that are controlling the purse strings, or should be responsible, to make sure that they know they are responsible, so that and by doing that, if we can come up with some best practice example or case studies. I mean, I've been involved over the last 2 months really with a group of people called Start with Smart. So these are all people that are involved in BMS systems, controls, all that sort of stuff, and it's been really enlightening for me, because what I've come to learn is that what they're doing actually complements what we're doing in the BIM world very effectively. The problem is that in the BIM world, we're not actually thinking in the way that they think from a controls perspective. Excuse me, Pierre, I don't mean that as too much of a generalization, but what we're actually doing to some extent is producing information that's compliant with ISO 19650 and all these sorts of things. But we're not, I think, engaging adequately with the building as a function, as it were, rather than we're looking at it as the light came on for me just actually this weekend. I was talking to some people, and in many ways, what we've got with what we're delivering, we've got the physical building. Whereas in the controls world, to some extent, they're not bothered about the physical building. What they're doing is they're thinking of things as a logical building. And therefore, the network and relationships of what they're doing and what conditions they are monitoring, there's an opportunity. If we bring those things together properly, then we can actually test things. And the guy that's leading this Start with Smart group is Justin Kirby, and he's been hammering us as a group for the last month or so to say we need testable cases. We need to say, Paul's example there, that scenario that you gave there, Paul, if we could capture that as an example, and then we can work back up the line to say, what do we actually need in terms of asset information, and why do we actually need it? Because all too often we're doing things because it's in the spec, or because it's in the BIM execution plan, whereas actually what we need to do is understand what happens if that is missing. I'm sorry, Paul. You've been very patient.
No, I mean, so this is pulling all this together and going back to and the other Paul saying, I can't believe that architects aren't doing stuff properly. There's another word for it this way, but I call it space, the final frontier, right? Once we start to get some space back into buildings so that we can put all the services in that actually people want, then and we're not preoccupied by lettable space. And of course, lettable space restricts the height of building you can do, because if you can't let it for a certain amount of money, you can't build it in the first place, yada, yada, yada. But the point is that we've never been given any space to do it. So you've ended up with a load of people solving problems that they shouldn't have had in the first place, but therefore doing it wrong. And therefore now it's all being found out. I mean, I can't go to a building and find anything right, and I'm just I'm getting quite depressed about it, to be honest. But that's another situation. But we're working to try and lead it from the front end. What we do about the legacy issue is I don't know, and unfortunately I think that the because I always say, if you do an inspection on fire dampers, or you inspect the smoke control system and there's a load of things wrong with it, then the first thing you've got to do is put that report in and make sure that the fire risk assessor sees it so that they can assess the risk. And I'm sure sometime in this mid-term there's not enough time, money, or people to fix all the problems we've got. Okay, we can't fix the problems to make it perfect. It's never going to happen. So I think we need to look into how we do some more risk assessment, but we still need to know where everything is, and I think that's really what we're talking about here. But you cannot start without a fire strategy. You cannot, if you've got a smoke control system and you don't know how it's supposed to work, then it's wrong, and the design needs to be checked, full stop.
Absolutely.
Because people have done things that they say are code compliant, but it's not difficult to be code compliant for smoke control in a basement. Extract from each area 10 air changes an hour and 100 newtons on the door. Doesn't tell you about what products you have to use to achieve that. So it can well be code compliant, but it may not be compartmented, and it may not be safe, but it's code compliant. So we need to do away with the code compliancy. You have to go back to the building regulations, which is protect escape routes and build a safe building from the fire point of view.
Thanks, Paul. Carl.
Thanks, George. I just wanted to come back to something that Paul Sheedy was talking about a few minutes ago around the digitization of building information and maintenance information, and the Reg 38 stuff and so on, which I think is absolutely the right ambition. But I have some issues with it. I think largely the technology to make it possible is done. It's here. We can use it. I can illustrate this again with a fire door story. It's not unusual for me to find fire doors that have labels on them that appear to me to be intended to lead me to some digital data. And indeed, it's not unusual to see two such labels on a door. And I have, with only one exception, I've not been able to find the data that's connected via a QR code or a barcode or whatever it might be. So I think that making the data available for the lifespan of the building is challenging, and I don't believe that we have a solution for that currently. And then I think that the other element of this, and George, this is something you and I have discussed previously, is that building information, digital building information, reminds me a great deal at the moment of the early days of the internet, where all the people putting money into it wanted to create what they referred to then as walled gardens, where they controlled the access to information that might be available via the World Wide Web. And I see that very much now, that those organizations who have built platforms for managing digital data do so as a commercial activity. They want to corral their clients to restrict them to that platform. And I get that commercially entirely. Of course they do. But I think that this is bigger than that. And I think that in the same way the internet now is essentially, the qualified comment, obviously, essentially open access, we need to arrive at the same situation with building data, where the data exists in open formats that can be secured, of course, but the client, the building owner, can choose how to access that data, what platform to use, and so on. I think those issues are probably key. Ensuring sustainable long-term access to the data that has been expensively put together, and ensuring that commercial providers don't turn this into a way to make money. George, the example I gave you when we talked about this is that I had to have my dog put down 18 months ago. The reason being I couldn't afford the vet fees. And the reason I can't afford the vet fees is because venture capitalists have bought all the veterinary surgeries in this country and increasingly own the insurance companies as well. And I fear that we will create a similar situation with digital data for buildings, in that the service providers own access to our data. And they'll say, hey, no, the data is yours. It's all good. It's always your data. We've got it safe on our servers here. You can access it through our platform and so on. It'll cost you £50,000 a year, or pick a number. And I think that we need to fix those issues.
Yeah. So what you're saying there is that I'm passionately supporting that. And one of the things, as I think everybody knows, I've been involved in what's now called the Golden Thread since when it was first mentioned back in 2020. And one of the things that I've been preaching is that exactly the example that you've said there, where you've got maybe a specialist door DNA system, as it were. Somebody signs up for that, and then the only way you find out anything about the door is by going through that particular portal. It's the same with inspections of fire stopping, for example. The only way you can see where the product is or where that particular item is by going through that portal. Now, the encouraging thing because this group is a task and finish group, so we're not here to just moan about things. What we're actually here to do is share our ways of solving that particular problem. So I've got something hopefully that's encouraging for people, and that is that about probably 5 years ago, when I started on this golden thread journey, when I was talking to different software companies, they really, although they said they were interested in collaboration and integration, they actually weren't. Yeah, they weren't up for it at all, really. They just put barriers in place. Over this last year, I've seen a big change. A big change. I was down at Digital Construction Week in May, or June rather, and everybody I was speaking to was saying, we've got API access to our data. Now, the problem with that, the only thing with that is consistency of information about how their clients are actually using the software. So we're just literally, just before I came on here, we're doing some work with Plan Radar at the moment. And one of the problems Plan Radar have got, I say it's not really a problem for them, but it's a problem for us all, is that everybody that uses Plan Radar, they can set up their own templates. Now that's seen as being very flexible and great, which is true. But unless people are using a common classification and taxonomy and a common method of working, then we just got chaos. So part of what I'm trying to do here is encourage the use of standardization in terms of taxonomy, classification, and the way FM is being structured. And there's some really good stuff coming out that we're now part of, as in Active Plan is now part of, and it's called the ADS Alliance, which is bringing together Uniclass, NRM, and SFG20, which I think is going to be quite interesting. So that's maybe a step in the right direction. And what we're also trying to do is bring in FMS 002, which is a standard that Chris, I imagine, is involved with. That's through CIBSE, isn't it? And also GOVS 004, which again is another standard for the way buildings are. I don't know who's behind that, whether it's RICS or whatever, but certainly a lot of this is coming down the line. And if we can draw that together so that we can simplify what information is being, or standardize and simplify what information is being created, then we can start to give the experts, in this case maybe fire engineers or access strategy people, or Paul's expertise, which is ventilation and smoke control. If we can get all this information together, it means that we can get something that's joined up. Kevin?
Yeah, completely on page on having something that is open and people, because we've had the same issue around what Carl mentioned regarding information such as photographs that has been done on I won't say the company's website, and allow you to see round support and so on. But then it's a case of actually the client doesn't want to keep on paying for that upgrade per month, per year, per month, whatever the agreement is, and so on like that, because it's costing them. They just want, so then we're saying actually the design team, they still need to finish some of those things off and need that information. So it's a case of they're not going to have that raw information rather than in a format that's open. So I completely agree, necessarily that and the standardization. Well, this goes back to the original. It was just a comment I was going to make on the basis of, because I get involved in writing golden thread and things like that for some clients, and looking into that. And as part of that, obviously, from a HRB point of view, the accountable person and so on, and really should have a golden thread policy. And to me, that not necessarily is all the digital things of everything on a building. It's not golden thread's about. Golden thread is very much about compliance only. It's not about actually that's not a compliant, but I need to do that to maintain my building, right? That's a separate element, and it's a question of understanding these are the minimum requirements we need as for compliance for the design team and so on, through a process, construction, whatever. And there's another one in terms of occupation. So that whole policy needs to be done, and then the roles and responsibilities of individuals within that to make sure it's maintained. And that also has to link then closely to what we're saying. And so for me, you might have something in an AR or an asset requirements to say this is what we need to do. Some of that could be golden thread, and some of it could be just general maintenance that have no relevance to compliance. I think the other point is what I was trying to get at earlier was how do we find that information that everyone can have access to that information and not just a few individuals when they want to know these things. So whether it be somebody's managing a building and you've got a private, apartment, whatever, that somebody bought and they can do things to them, then how do they get that information in a way that they know that if they're doing something, they're impacting it? If it's a social housing point of view, how do you engage with them to a point that they know, what's going on in their building and so on like that? So to me, you need to separate out for me what is golden thread and what is maintenance, so people clearly understand the difference between those two things, because I think it can get confused that everything is golden thread and it's not.
Can I just challenge that a little bit, Kevin? I appreciate that golden thread is mentioned in the legislation, and one of the things that I think that we need to move away from is simply looking at things from a compliance perspective. And although I think you're quite right that we have to make sure that that aspect of the golden thread, but the way I look at the golden thread, to be honest, it's like DNA. So it's starting right at the beginning of the process, and it's the information set that's going through all the different stages, and the definition of what should be in the golden thread should be being determined in a reasonably agile way, according to what is it that you're monitoring and how do we achieve what's needed. So I'm not saying that we're challenging the regulations, but I think what we need to be doing is looking at this from a point of view of making sure that we know the information that is needed for managing any system that's managing, and it's the relationship perhaps between the spaces, what is going on in the spaces, because I think that's part of the golden thread as well, because unless you know what space is being used for and what the impact is on the systems. So, right, we've got half an hour left.
Can I just come back on that very quickly?
Yep, go ahead.
So for me, it's a case of if you have different mechanisms for different things. For me, there's an element of compliance, and there's an element. This is where it becomes. You can have all the standard processes. That's great, but the accountable person has to feed into what says that golden thread is on that site.
Yeah,
because they're responsible for what's on the site. So that's what I'm trying to say is golden thread can be this in terms of compliance. But if the accountable person says, actually, I want this to be added as part of that, and that because that's specific, because it's specific to the building, it's not necessarily standardized. However, you could pick, standard processes and say, well, this needs to include and that needs to include in. So that's for me where all that lines in is the fact that that accountable person's got to be integral to what is included in that golden thread for that specific site.
Agreed. And the other challenge with that, Kevin, is that term responsible person is something that very few people in the industry, I think, really understand what that means. And it varies. It depends on who you're working, what the role is. I mean, you understand this much better than me. You've spent months mapping it out. I know you've shown me your processes and things, but it's got to be something that people that are, on the sprinkler system, for example, the event that Paul was talking about was one that we were at, that was organised by the universities group. So it was Usha that organised it, and Dame Judah spoke at that. She brought up an example of a sprinkler system that had been installed, and the pump that was installed to service a 20-story block could only had the power to pump up to the 13th floor. And the apparently the person that installed it was aware of that, but they didn't say anything. And she was understandably, castigating the person that installer for not being competent or not being responsible. And I thought about it afterwards, and I thought, well, how would they actually raise that as an issue? Because if they've gone in there at lowest price, which is almost certainly true, they won the contract, they've been told by a designer that is the right thing to install, who would they report it to? And I asked that question, and not in the event, but afterwards. And actually, the regulator, there's only two people that can report things, apparently, to the regulator. There's a resident, and there's the principal accountable person. That contractor has no mechanism to report anything to anybody. Now that, I think that should be cross or something like that we're. Pierre.
Thank you. Okay, so George, one of the key things here is about ownership. Absolutely everything that we've spoken about is ownership, ownership, ownership. I'll repeat this about the Dubai BIM mandate, the idea of shared data, the digitization of things. If that starts from day one, remember what Dubai Metro is versus every one of the property owners. Their layer is the base layer. But what they're doing is they're using the data to act as future infrastructure development capabilities. So predictive stuff. It's looking at portfolios, big buildings, etc. So it's a very, very broad system. But one of the things about the ownership, and from a digitization point of view, is about the issue of confidentiality. And one of the things in our industry is we don't share information. If I'm looking at doing a high-rise building, I don't share that information with anybody else other than the design team. And what we're doing is we're losing a huge data set capability of good practice, bad practice, all the wrong things that are being done, no lessons learned, etc. And that's a very, very big, powerful capability. The other part about the ownership thing comes to standards. Now, having been on a couple of these global teams in the Middle East, you've got AIA, you've got REBA, you've got people from San Francisco to Sydney with all different standards. Guess what? It's a melange of bullshit because nobody actually submits something. The actual standard needs to be the standard of language, not the spoken language, but the technical language, because then it means that we've got a consistency over everything. Now, one of the things we spoke about here in the discussion was about in the methods, we've got API access, but you need ownership. You can have the API. Somebody's got to own that data. Somebody's got to nurture that data. Somebody's got to develop that data. And having access to the data is okay, as long as it's being used in a responsible way. And what's the first thing that's going to come out of this? Is us put here, follow the money. So what's going to happen is that data will get taken out and used for commercial reasons. And the moment that happens, there's no responsibility. We just use it, we make money in business, and that's it. On the other side, and it's an important one from Middle East again, was CapEx versus OpEx. And having worked in a mall developer, they're not worried about the OpEx. Why? Because it's the tenants, it's a deferred future price.
Yeah.
And those points all just resonate about how do you make this a business case? Because unless we make it a business case, we're not going to improve things. But I think we need to really get down onto the lowest level. Everything you said was about we're looking at compliance. What we're not looking at is the added benefit that we can get from having data. We can start doing predictive things. We can start doing preemptive things. And that should be going back to the insurers and saying, look at how we're saving the potential risks. Until somebody dies, we're not going to get any interest in it. That's the closest that we'll get. But you can see from Thames Water, they're down 20 billion in the tubes. The directors signed away a whole bunch of money for their dividends with no accountability. There's the problem, that if we can't even get the accountability in big organizations, what do you think we're going to get in social housing where the local council involvement is not competent at that level? Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. Right, so I know that Richard will be going to hammer me in a moment because this is a work stream to try and deal with task and finish. So we need to, before I hand over to you, Mustafa, we need to be thinking, what is the next step? What are we doing about? But I think we're all violently agreeing that something's got to be done.
Sorry,
Right.
what's the task?
That's what I'm just saying. The task is to be able to find solutions for delivering retrospective fire strategies.
Okay.
That's my objective with this. Given the fact that there are few fire engineers, and how can we make it easier for those fire engineers to deliver what we need? And just before I hand over to you, Mustafa, I'm thinking that we have more standardization, so that we also have better ways of structuring the information. So pulling together the key information that's needed. So identify what information fire engineers need to be able to carry out that, and then mechanisms to then see it kept up to date. Because I think unless the fire strategy is a statutory thing to do, the health and safety file is a statutory thing to do. They're supposed both to be kept up to date. Therefore, the information that is needed to do those, which is both the fire strategy and also the documentation, those ought to we should try and figure out a way that that is tied into the statutory requirements. Does that make sense to you, Chris? Yeah. Okay, good.
So can't go up you. Absolutely. And those three key principles you just mentioned there, George, I know we're already pushed for time, so I just want to say, for me, in my world of more predominantly FM, I guess, yeah, AM and FM, those three key principles you mentioned there, absolutely essential. And if we don't do those, I don't think we'll be successful in what we're trying to do. So I think that's absolutely key.
And the other thing that it was interesting talking to Neville about the importance of fire. Fire, as far as his experience is concerned, he went from a situation where they were spending 6 million a year on the budget was 6 million that he could work with, and that was reduced to 1.75 million. So it was dropped by over 2/3, because of just different priorities. So I guess the next step with this is to say, if you could, what I think we need is more fire engineers involved in this group, because what we want to do is find ways that they can do the work more easily. Ron Hedger, who's sent his apologies this morning, but Ron was on the first meeting, and he's already using a lot of standardization in the way that he's following things through, and also he's using 360 photography, which I think everybody knows is one of the things I'm quite passionate about. And I think a combination of 360 photography and more standardization could make a big difference. And as Pierre's saying as well, also responsibility, people understanding. So if you've got anybody that you know that's a fire engineer, could you put them into the chat or let us know who they are, make an introduction? Good. Okay, Mustafa. You've been very patient.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to comment on the discussion that we're having around the challenges in terms of the fire strategy. And from the comments, I could see that there were two parts to it. First, there's the compliance issue, and then there's also a resource problem as well. But I do think it could be worthwhile if we do explore the resource issue, and that's because there is some economic element to this. Yes, digitalization can help. It's a good first step to help us to maintain that data. But the challenge still remains, which is the continuous maintenance of that data. And I like your analogy of the DNA. The DNA is quite efficient, but because it is self-maintaining. If we are going to apply that similar approach to the building system, then there is the challenge of that continuous maintenance. And one of the root causes in terms of why we have this challenge, it's because most of the reporting and most of the problems that we're talking about today, they don't really make money. They cost money. And because of some of the limitations in terms of enforcement, you could say that the the drivers aren't really there to make sure that people do invest in things like these. And what Carl actually said, I really found it interesting, but from a different perspective, because Carl was actually presenting concerns that people could actually make money off this. But playing the devil's advocate here, I would say that that could actually be the solution. Because if there is money in it, then there would be the resource to do it. So I'm sort of thinking, would it be worthwhile if we sort of explore the business case across all fragmented levels in terms of being able to sort of, drive this as an enabler to look at the challenges that we could have, and also to look at case studies of the not so good practices as well as the good practices.
I think that's where I'm going with this as well, Mustafa. Having use cases. So one of the things that I would like to do is, if people are willing to come together for another meeting on examples and scenarios, so we can share stories and things like that. And to a great extent, the Golden Thread Task Force that we've set up is intended to bring together people that have got solutions with people that have got problems. And then we use that as a mechanism to pay for it. Because if we can come together with some joined up solutions, which are covering different technologies, different ways of using data standards, and also processes, then we can bring together something that can be charged for, and then be part of that. So I think most of you are aware of the Golden Thread Task Force, but we need to empower it with some examples. So all of you, I imagine, have got lots of examples of things that have gone wrong. What we now need to do, if you could contribute some of those, just write a couple of paragraphs on 2 or 3 maybe anonymized situations, then we may be able to use that, Mustafa, to leverage investment. So is anybody up for coming? Could you put use case into the chat if you're willing to put together something as examples, as experiences? Paul?
I was going to suggest, George, would it be an idea to maybe bring on the guys in Shanghai, who, as you know, over the last decade have basically been at the forefront of digitalizing all the fire regulations in Shanghai from where they were before? Would it be an idea to have them on for 15, 20 minutes about how they did it, what they did over the last decade to change the whole Shanghai fire regulations? So I think they're probably furthest ahead than anybody I know.
Would people be up for that? Get a few nods. Yeah, good. Okay, we can set that up. Carl.
Thanks, George. I just wanted to come back very quickly on something that Mustafa mentioned. That you'd got the impression, Mustafa, that I object to people making money out of the digitalization or yeah, I don't. I'm not a charity either. I like to make as much money as I possibly can out of what I do for a living. My concern is about ensuring that the data is long-term and sustainable, so it can always be accessed in the future, and that people using the platforms to access their data are not unreasonably tied into paying a service provider for that service. I gave the example of walled gardens in the early days of the web. I spend an awful lot of money one way or another on web access, software, subscriptions, and so on, because I see the benefits. So I'm much happier paying a service provider for benefits and not so that I can access my data. And that, for me, that's a key distinction. I don't mind anybody making money for what they do, provided that the client is free to go elsewhere if they choose to.
Absolutely. Julie, you sort of put your hand up and then dropped it down again.
Good morning. Yes, I'm just sorry. Let me calm my hands. Meetings. Hello.
Hi.
Just the cases, the use cases. I'm in a position where I work within a transport company within the Property and Estates Department. Unfortunately, from a corporate level, they tend to have slippy shoulders with regards to fire and how to implement the right measures, and it's been left to property as well as operations, but it's very disjointed. Whilst we have a fire engineer on site who carries out our responsibilities throughout the network, operations follow their own, and corporate really don't pull us all together. And that's what my frustration is. We're trying to digitize everything now through our CAFM system and having that integrated with links and stuff to SharePoint with all the certification and all the PPMs that are being carried out. I am just frustrated, I suppose, and what I'm trying to get out of this is, one, to make sure that we're compliant with what we're responsible to hold, but an overall check within the company to ensure that there's a joint up thinking between operations and property, because it's very disjointed at the moment. So I'm just looking for maybe some kind of ideas about how we do that.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've got 10 minutes left, or 9. An aspect that I'd like to suggest is whether there's appetite to do something as examples of how we could actually create a fire strategy that is sustainable and how that can be applied. So what I'm going to go and just show you again. This is probably for the 100th time that you've seen this, but sorry, Teams isn't working for me now. Okay. Brilliant. Still not working? I think they've changed something in Teams now. This is okay. I'm going to give up. Brilliant. Okay. So coming back to it, what is anybody interested in working collaboratively around an example, maybe even suggesting an example that we could look at in terms of bringing together fires, a means by which we could standardize some of these things. Would you be up for doing a workshop on that? Is that a yes? Well, okay. Okay, I've got enough now to move forward with that, I think. I'm sorry, this has thrown me a little bit that Teams once again has let me down. So
sorry, this is happening all the time with Teams. As you know, we do a lot of meetings and it's been a nightmare, one thing or another. Does anybody know of another system or platform that works, that they've used, that you can send out invites like we do and get responses? because we've looked and tried and found absolutely nothing. If anybody knows of anything, let me know, will you?
Yeah, Zoom and Google don't seem to
No.
tackle it either. But anyway, Bernard, you've got something to say.
Right. George, thank you very much indeed. I came into this very much from the point of view of toxicity and during COVID. And what drew me towards the subject we're discussing at the moment was the way in which the airborne virus enveloped particulate matter in a building. And we were studying hospitals. We were studying internal flow paths through hospitals, trying to mitigate the spread of this airborne infection. And there's a category of person that I came up that we started collaborating with, who profoundly impressed me. And those were the authorized engineers working in collaboration with certain NHS hospitals. And I found that this was a talent pool which I had never heard of before. And I think if anybody knows of authorized engineers, maybe yourselves are in this category. But I did find some very knowledgeable individuals who really understood all the different aspects that they were trying to grasp. And they were considering noise, they were considering smell, they were considering light pollution, they were considering, obviously, fire safety. And above all, they were considering the spread of infection. And so when you look at solutions, when you look at commercializing solutions, unfortunately, as we have all agreed, people live in the hope that we will never have a fire, so I couldn't care a damn, and I'm going to spend any money on fire safety. But if you touch on the pain points that really irritate individuals, if you consider thermal containment and energy efficiency, if you consider acoustic insulation, prevention of excessive noise, if you consider light pollution, if you consider living with all the smells that you don't want to live with, and if you can take a much broader view, you can commercialize fire safety. Thank you, George.
No, I think you're right. We just got a minute left, Pierre.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you as a group? Obviously, you've just given up an hour and a half of your time. I hope you feel it's been worthwhile. I think this is a really important area. If you could suggest, I've noticed that there's no fire engineers been put into the list, but if you would give that some thought, I don't know, Kevin, if Jacobs, if you've got some contacts that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as we through this. I'll ask Graham, so I run the architecture studio in Birmingham. He runs the fire department.
Yeah.
He's a doctor of fire engineering and so on. So I'll ask him whether he's available to attend around this. He's happy, wants to input. He's based in Birmingham as well, so I'll speak to him.
Yeah. Anne from Resolus, have you got any contacts at all? Or could you ask around?
Yeah, I'm thinking of somebody I used to work with at Equans as well, so I'll ask around and see if I can find somebody.
Good. Okay. So I want to keep this moving. So my plan is that we have another one of these meetings. I mean, do you think it's worthwhile to have another meeting? That's the most important thing, because I don't want to be arranging these things if people aren't enthusiastic about it. But I'm prepared to organise another one in a couple of weeks' time, if that's something that you'd like to do. Kevin. You're on mute, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm happy. What I thought might be useful, especially when I was talking to Graham, is it's like literally a 1A4 or even half a page just to say, with a couple of things saying, this is what we want to do, this is the aim. in terms of the end goal of what we're looking to do.
Yes.
Just as a couple of paragraphs, maybe one paragraph or a few subheadings or something, and then I can obviously say to Graham, in terms of this is what we're looking to do, and this is what the workshop's doing, and the output's likely to come from, and we really need your input on that. Is that something you could do?
Yeah,
potentially.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, definitely.
Right.
I think what we need to do is to identify how we can draw in a number of people as Bernard's saying there, authorizing engineers. The trouble is with authorizing engineers, in my experience, is that there's very few of them, and a lot of them are retiring, which is a common problem. Good. Okay. Well, we've got another meeting on Thursday, which is around damp and mold and all that sort of stuff. But have you put in the chat if you want another meeting?
Yes,
if you want
please,
to be
George.
invited to the next one. Yeah. Good.
Yes, please. And your point on authorized engineers is absolutely correct. I hope they follow my example, and that is work beyond retirement age, because without being too facetious, individuals like myself who have been privileged are able to work beyond retirement age, have the time, can give it. Why waste 50 years of experience if you could still make a difference by being invited onto these into these meetings, learning and giving, above all giving.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I think as well. Good. All right. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for the time, and we'll speak again in a couple of weeks' time. Okay.
Thank you.
Don't forget the forum meeting. Don't forget the forum meeting next week on the 3rd. So that's, if you don't have an invite to the forum meeting, the BIM in Asset Management forum meeting, which is next Wednesday. It's Wednesday on at 11 o'clock. Then let us know.
Just put forum in the chat.
Yeah, good. See you later. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks. Bye. Bye.